The Mercedes A45S is one of the great hot hatches of recent times. It's fast, it's good looking, fun to drive. In fact, the only way you could really improve it is to make it more practical. And that's the idea behind this, the GLA45S.
Yep, it's based on the ordinary GLA, which itself is essentially a jacked up crossover version of the A-Class. But under the bonnet is the world's most powerful series production 2-litre 4-cylinder engine, which sees it go head-to-head with the Audi RS Q3 and Porsche Macan.
But on paper, this should bury the Audi and destroy the Porsche, because Mercedes has given it a fancy pants all-wheel drive system that lets it go from mild-mannered hatchback to axe murderer on wheels, and it even has a drift mode. There's no drift mode. They got rid of the drift mode. Why would they do that? I can't recommend this. You serious?
Yes, while the A45S will let you slide safely on demand, the GLA45S has been nobbled. No drift mode here. It's become a slightly fat A45S with a decent engine, decent interior, and a specific focus on practicality.
Still mad, to be honest, but I'll be professional. I'll review the car. Boot space, electric tailgate, fine. Rear space, legroom, headroom, USBs. It's got Isofix, for God's sake. Kids would have been perfectly safe with a drift mode. It's got 7 airbags or something.
Things do get better up front. The cabin is sensational. The GLA has really nice sporty seats that would have been great for drifting in. It has good tech, lots of space for your bits and bobs, everything's easy to use, and it has a really good infotainment system consisting of 2 10 or 12-inch screens depending on how much money you want to spend. But even though it does lack a drift mode, and I'll never forgive it for that, it still does have one really fun trick up its sleeve.
Launch control, or race start as Mercedes calls it. Now this will allow the car to do 0 to 62 in, well, let's find out. Race mode. How can a car have race mode but no drift mode? Foot on the brake, floor it, release. Oh my God. That is 62 in 4.3 seconds. So it's 0.4 seconds slower than the A45. But I can forgive that because the A45S is an absolute monster. It's a sports car killer. And this thing ain't far off. This thing is quicker than anything else in its class. The engine makes 421 horsepower, and that's good for a top speed of 170 miles an hour, which even I will admit is probably slightly too fast for the school run.
And the torque is strong, 500 Newton meters by the time you get to around 5,000 RPM. So even though it's turbocharged and has plenty of low down grunt, the turbo engine behaves somewhat like a naturally aspirated unit and rewards you for chasing the red line.
Sound is an interesting one. A lot of cars are being made far quieter these days due to increasingly stringent noise regulations. And if you listen to the GLA45 from the outside, you'll notice it doesn't actually sound all that obnoxious. But Mercedes have come up with an optional solution called AMG Real Performance Sound. And what this does is it uses a microphone to record the actual engine and exhaust noise and then plays it back amplified through the speakers. It sounds a bit like a cop-out, but think about it. If you go to a concert and you listen to your favorite artist performing, you're not actually hearing them sing. You're hearing their voice picked up by microphones and then amplified through speakers. Same thing here. It actually works really well. In here, it's popping and banging and sounds as aggressive as you might expect, but out there, you can drive past pedestrians without them noticing. None of them will say, oh look, there goes that GLA45S. Which one's that? The one without drift mode? Yeah, shame that.
The GLA45S shouldn't handle as well as the A45S on paper, and the reality is that it doesn't. The car weighs 1,765 kilograms, 140 kilograms more than the hatchback, and it shows. There's noticeably more inertia, so it takes slightly longer to change direction, and it doesn't quite like to carry as much speed through the bends as its smaller, lighter counterpart. It also doesn't feel quite as involving as the Porsche Macan, but that's not to say it's bad. Far from it. Even though there is no dedicated drift mode, the car will actually oversteer. With all the safety systems switched off, it can, if you're aggressive enough with it, get quite tail happy. It just won't hold your hand and be as quick to save your backside if things go wrong.
So what does it actually feel like to drive enthusiastically? Well, there's so much torque in this thing. You put your foot down and you get immediate pickup. The turn in is okay. There's a little bit of understeer. It kind of wants to wash wide as you throw it into a corner. But there's enough grip there, certainly in dry conditions, to give you the confidence you need to carry speed through a bend. The steering is actually quite fast and responsive too. Doesn't feel nervous at all, but it does give you good entry into the corners. And there's a decent amount of feedback on the exit. In all, it's actually quite an enjoyable car to drive. The gearbox feels great too. It's an 8-speed automatic, and because every time you shift up, you get a nice little gunshot from the exhausts, it gives you that extra feeling of being involved with the driving experience. Ultimately, even though this is bigger than the traditional hot hatch, it feels just as much fun to drive. Brakes are good too.
When you decide to knock back the pace a little, the GLA45S is still enjoyable. It's quiet, comfortable, and the suspension, while slightly on the jiggly side, is definitely tolerable. It's the kind of car you can get on with every day, lending itself well to typical family usage like shopping and school runs that don't involve easy drifting.
And that's fine. Not everybody wants to drop their kid off at school sideways, I suppose. And when you start to look at this car for all the good things it does, rather than the one amazing thing that it doesn't, then you start to appreciate it for what it is. An Audi RS Q3 is better looking, but ultimately nowhere near as fast. The Porsche Macan is more desirable because of the badge, but doesn't have anywhere near as much power. This GLA45S ultimately is in a class of its own.
The GLA45S is a good option for anyone that really likes the idea of an A45S but needs a bit more space. Yes, it loses out slightly where sheer fun is concerned, but it more than makes up for that with added practicality. If you're after a fast, practical crossover, one that has a slightly crippling lack of, alright look, I'll let it go, the GLA45S is definitely worth a look.